Qatari newspaper puts out a statement that Iran accepted it. And then since then, there's been a lot of flip-flopping. Iran puts out a 10-point plan. Then Trump says it's fake. It came out of Nigeria. Then Arachi confirms it's good. Trump retweets it. No, doesn't confirm the 10-point plan. Confirms the war is over. And then I started worrying, is there a split within Iran? Maybe, maybe not. I doubt it. And the missiles were still flying from Iran. And then the new supreme leader, Mushtaba, made a statement saying, this is it. Stop firing the missiles. Instantly, the missiles stopped because they fired at the UAE, at Saudi, at Israel. And we have a multiple point peace plan. I'm sure you've seen the 10 points. If not, I can go through them, but I'm sure you've seen them. And the audience listened to them earlier. But essentially, it ends the war even for Hezbollah. So Israel's plan to destroy Hezbollah is gone. It allows, allegedly, according to Israel, according to Iran, to them continuing to enrich uranium, lifting of all sanctions, and the control of the Strait of Hormuz. And they're going to be charging a toll, about a $2 million toll. We don't know the number, but people's predict it's going to be the $2 million they mentioned earlier on the cargo ships coming out. So that's kind of a summary of like the facts of what happened, but also kind of my twist on why I think certain things happened. What's your analysis of it all?
Well, for the time that you've been streaming, I was streaming as well. I've since added my channels to the stream so people can see it. I was getting ready for bed. I wasn't entirely sure whether Trump was going to follow through on his ultimatums, but I think we need to take a step back, Mario, and think about what's been happening, not just today, but in the past few days. I've always tried to retain a degree of belief or perhaps benefit of the doubt that Trump had he has a strategy, or that there's a deeper thinking there behind him. But his statements over the past few days are not, and this isn't just me saying this is people who are from parts of the MAGA community, that he didn't sound like himself at all. Now, there are certain things in international relations that you do and you don't do. I'm not an expert intricately. I'm not as old as Larry, but I have worked in international relations for several years. I've been to front lines in Africa. I've been to the front lines in Ukraine. I know what it means to see negotiations firsthand, both in backdoor diplomacy and in the front cases. And Trump's style of approach, you could argue it's deterrence theory, the idea that, you increasingly get more intense with your rhetoric to try to deter the opponent. It's escalation, de-escalate to de-escalate. It's a classic thing that Western people will say Russia does. But to swear and to just laden expletives and constantly say you're going to bomb the shit out of them effectively is not, well, this is the guy who said he wanted to liberate the Iranian people, 2 months ago? And then to write today, I actually hesitated initially because I wasn't sure if it did. My initial reaction was it does. And what I'm getting at is when you say the words civilization will die today, that's overt indication or hint of genocide. And I'm not just saying that. That is war veterans who are, pro-Trump or whatever, more sympathetic to anti-IRGC, pro-Trump's initially they were pro the war, and then as it's gone on, people have this is out of control. And it's also law professors, more of the liberal woke left, if people want to label it like that, people who work in law from Harvard or some other people I spoke to. No, there's a case to be made that Trump was implicitly suggesting genocide. I mean, we don't know what he means. Is he talking about the energy sites? Is he talking about military targets? Is he talking about the bridges? Or is he talking about ancient civilization? Or is he just talking about anything? You don't do that. As the leader of the free world, as the man in charge of supposedly the most powerful military, there are certain things you don't do. Can you imagine, whether or not you like them historically, but can you imagine Winston Churchill saying that? Can you imagine FDR saying that? Can you imagine Eisenhower saying that? Right.
Yes, we even criticized Iran. By the way, I'm not as critical as most people on Trump's rhetoric. I don't like it, but I always throughout the day I've been saying, look, I don't like his rhetoric, but for me that matters a lot less than the action that happens afterwards. I think this is him out of desperation trying to get Iran to concede. But you're very right. As the leader of the world's biggest military or biggest superpower, you don't make statements like this because remember, one of the reasons people justified the war in Iran because they chanted death to America. I don't know if the supreme leader said it himself. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I'm sure he did. But that rhetoric was used by some to justify a war on Iran. Well, what about the rhetoric by Trump? So yes, you're right. There's certain rhetoric, and Trump is the superpower. You'd expect more from a country like
Two wrongs don't
the
make a
US,
right.
China. Yeah, exactly. Like I'm just saying what the point you're making. Many people, I agree with the point. Like there's a certain way to communicate. There's certain lines that shouldn't be crossed. Trump is Trump, but advocating for genocide or mentioning the nuclear weapon, for example, Trump didn't mention it, but that's another red line that I don't think no leader should ever cross. No one should ever utter these words as a leader. So yeah, I think that rhetoric was not good. But look, the action at the end of the day showed that his intention was always to end the war. So my question would be to you is like, if he talked shit, like he talked shit about Greenland and Canada, does it really matter? Everyone knows Trump is Trump.
Well, okay. I don't know. You seem to have no limit for what can be said. You don't.
No, there's definitely no. I agree with you. I'm kind of trying to play devil's advocate. Although I agree with you.
I get it. Look, what I would say is, go on.
Let me add one more question. Sorry, I'm going to move on to it just as well, because the next thing I want to talk about is what the Middle East is going to look like as well. I was talking about it with Larry. So as you respond to the comments as well on Trump's comments, this is a new reality we have now with the peace deal. If this moves through, and if Iran continues controlling the Strait of Hormuz, what happens to Israel? Because I feel Israel's leverage in the region is going to change drastically. What happens to Gulf-Iranian relations? What happens to Chinese influence in the region? Because if Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, that's indirectly China controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Could that become a threat to the petrodollar? Like, I think there's so many repercussions of this peace deal, if these are the terms, that will be felt for a very long time.
Yeah, let's come to that a little bit later. I want to talk a little bit about the deal as it stands, or whatever, the 10 points, because I think that's important. Firstly, just again, to emphasize that Trump is... Look, we're going back to sort of 1920s kind of rhetoric, in that sort of anything can be said. And it's the whole idea of you can have freedom of speech, but should you have freedom of consequence to say that? I don't know. I think there are certain limits to make a joke amongst one's friends in a private quarter is different to publicly stating such things on the internet. And again, you can argue. I find it insane to believe that there are people who will defend what Trump has done, even now. He has not won in this, and this leads us to the points, right? You said about the 10 points. You can bring it up on the screen, or we can go through them one by one. But largely, the first 3 are about cessation of hostilities across the Middle East, right? The other 2 are about the Strait of Hormuz. Then there's one about freezing assets. There's another one about nuclear power, and then there's another one about reparations, effectively. Now, let's look at them all. I'll bring them up here since I've got them to hand as well. So all of them, right, numbers 1 to 3 are about cessation of hostilities. Okay, well, that's kind of a given, right? The ones that I think are important to look at are number 4, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, 5, establishing a protocol and condition to ensure freedom and security of navigation. What does that mean? It's all the points that matter, or particularly of the sticking points, will be the sticking points for negotiation, are very vague. They're very open-ended, right? Reopening the Strait of Hormuz. What does that mean? Does that mean Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz? Does it mean that America is allowed, as part of a multinational force, to secure it? Does it mean that there's a toll booth which is shared by Oman?
Vague. It's vague on purpose, I think. It's just to give Trump something to say he won.
It's vague because the Iranians want to start negotiations on those terms. Establishing a protocol. Okay, so what's that going to be? Is that going to be a multinational force in tandem with the Saudis? You mentioned about China, and we know that the Iranians and the Saudis were developing a rapprochement, as it's known, or normalizing or improving relations, restoring relations a few years ago. And I think we've known for the past several months, especially since the 12-day war, that the Saudis and Iranians have been in communication. They do talk. And a critical piece of information for everyone to remember is that about 5-6 months ago, the Pakistanis, established a strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm not saying that is a critical underpinning of what's happened, but clearly the Saudis have been talking to the Pakistanis, who were leading the intermediary efforts between Iran and America. And the Chinese have been putting pressure on Iran, obviously because they need to. It benefits them. They only have a reserves of about 4 or 5 months before this would be really eating into their economy and interests, but also JD Vance. I think JD Vance is critical here because you mentioned about MAGA and the future of the movement. Well, right now there's going to be a lot of discontent in America about what is Trump doing. The Epstein files, is this all a distraction for that? And so JD Vance, as people who think is going to inherit the movement, has been very quiet about this. He's never approved of this war. He's never supported it. And so he's clearly wanted to get it stopped because he's thinking about, how do I inherit the MAGA movement if it's going to be tarnished by what Trump has done over Iran? So I think that's one of the motivations Vance was suddenly getting involved, right? When he smelled a genuine opportunity. But bottom line, I think that the Saudis have been pushing the Pakistanis, and therefore you're going to see a multi-convoluted situation around trying to establish the Strait of Hormuz like protocol, right? What does he mean by protocol and conditions? Then the other 3 pieces quickly. So payment of compensations. There's no way the Americans are going to pay reparation costs to Iran. So what does that mean? Are they going to allow the Iranians to take money from the Strait as sort of a form of reparations? That's similar to point 8, release Iranian funds and frozen assets held by the US. Well, the Americans won't do that. Maybe they'll agree to give them access to some of their own funds and then claim that that's them giving them reparations, right? Number 7, full commitment to lifting sanctions on Iran. Okay, so that's commitment to lifting sanctions. It doesn't specify how many. It just says sanctions. So could that be 2 sanctions, 10% of the sanctions? So it's very deliberately vague so that it gives room for negotiations. And then obviously number 9 commits to not seeking nuclear weapons. Okay, so if America agrees to lift a significant proportion of sanctions, the Iranians will, not pursue a nuclear weapon. The problem with that is that just goes back to the JCPOA, right? So the JCPOA is the deal that was established in the Obama administration. Trump hated it, and a lot of people thought it was really soft on the mullahs and they were going to abuse it. And, in some ways they did. But effectively, if Trump's going to negotiate some kind of nuclear deal, it's going to be, most analysts agree, a worse version of the JCPOA. It's about like NAFTA, right? When he renegotiated NAFTA, the trade agreement between Canada and Mexico in his first term, he literally just renamed it USMCA just because he wanted to put USA at the front. It was that ridiculous. So the worst point of all of this is Trump has basically admitted or accepted that they're going to use the Iranian plan or proposal as the framework. Well, that gives huge leverage to the Iranians because they're effectively in the driving seat because they're the one that shared the plans. The Americans are having to be like, okay, so can we amend this bit? Can we change that bit? So it gives the Iranian leverage. So in no circumstances, bottom line, I'll pass back to you, is this, can you make this out to be some kind of win for the Americans or for Trump? I'm very surprised that they've gone for it. But as I always say, just because the talks start doesn't mean you can guarantee anything. Yes, we're in a ceasefire.
Can you send me the ones you're reading as well? I closed mine.
I will
send it to you on WhatsApp in the meantime. And my next question for you is, how's Israel's role going to look like now in the Middle East? Israel's had that sense that it's untouchable. No one would attack it because the US will come to their aid, and they have better military capabilities than Iran. And with America's aid, like if Iran starts to bomb them too much, the US will come to their aid. Well, now the US will not touch Iran again after this war. Iran will try to get nuclear weapons, maybe, I don't know, but they don't really need it because they've proved deterrence through this war, through their drone warfare, through their missiles, underground missiles. So then,
well, that's a key point, actually, isn't it? There's no mention of disarming Iran. There's no mention of destruction, no more missiles, right? There's no mention of that at all. So the Americans have effectively given up on trying to force the Iranians to, give up all their drones, missiles, etc. I think that's a key point. As for Israel, I mean, this is interesting, right? You're from Lebanon originally, and my concern in all of this is Iran has been hit hard. They have suffered a lot of damage. I don't think we should deny that. But the problem is or whatever. From the American perspective, the problem is you're not going to win because you haven't beaten the system, right? You can look at Afghanistan or Myanmar as two examples, right? The countries have been ravaged by, or Yemen, perhaps is a better example. Those countries have been ravaged by civil war for years, for massive conflict. But because the system, the governing system in Yemen, the Houthis, and in the case of the Taliban, they came back, the country has never really seen a shift in its governance. So the point is that this was what's known as a decapitation strategy. The Israelis and Americans want to decapitate the regime, to take it out enough so that there can be a new system in power. But they haven't done that. They've taken out a few key people. Yes, they've dealt a significant blow, but the system is so well embedded and so deep that it's not going to shift. So the country may well be in a bad shape, but the system that runs it, the IRGC and all that, the Supreme Council, et cetera, isn't going anywhere. So it's not an effective victory. It's what you call a Pyrrhic victory, right? For the Americans in many essence. And what I find interesting about Israel is they didn't know. At least from my understanding, I haven't had time to read every single headline, but from my understanding, the Tel Aviv.
No, that's true. The reports that came in from Israel, they were caught by surprise. Now, I don't know if Netanyahu was caught by surprise. Some people told me that no way Netanyahu was not in the loop, and maybe other officials were not kept in the loop because of these negotiations needed to remain confidential. And they didn't want anything to leak. They didn't want anything to leak to the press. So Iran thinks they have an edge, and that kind of shows desperation on the American-Israeli side. So Netanyahu might have been in the loop, or maybe not. Maybe this is the beginning of a new era. Exactly, that would be pretty extraordinary if Israel was not in the loop on this. That is the beginning of a.
No, I mean, I agree with you in part, but they've
accepted a ceasefire that includes Hezbollah. That if Israel will not continue their campaign and Hezbollah will pull out of the south,
we don't know that. What I would say,
we don't know what, because which one? Because this came in now while you're speaking. A report came in according to Channel 12. Iran insisted that Lebanon be included in the ceasefire. A senior Israeli official told Israeli Channel 12. That came in just 10-15 minutes.
No, there's been discussion. No, in principle they are involved, right? Point number one of the Iranian plan is cessation of war on Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen.
Yeah, exactly.
Can
you send me that on WhatsApp, please, so I have it open as well, Pyotr? Or it's not on
your laptop? I sent it to you. Maybe it hasn't gone through. What I was saying is simply that this is a reflection of how Trump sees the world, right? He sees the world through great power politics, much like Putin does. And so Trump doesn't want to bother with trying to worry about Israel. I also think Trump's had enough of Israel. The guy ebbs and flows, right? 6 months ago, he was very interested in what Netanyahu had to say about bombing Iran, sorry. And so they did Operation Midnight Hammer. And then Trump's like, okay, obliterated, done with that. Had enough of you, Netanyahu, leave me alone, right? 6 months on, his attention is come back to Iran because he's been focused on it. He seems to have phases, right? After this, he's going to go to Cuba. I think he's going to do something over Cuba. Maybe not a war, but I think he's going to use economic pressure to try and get the government to leave. Or Israeli
military official just told AP that they are still attacking Iran.
Well, they are. Yeah, we know that. The Iranians and Israelis have been launching strikes.
No, but Israel, Mujtaba requested a halt of cessation of attacks. And Israel, I didn't expect Israel to continue striking. Sorry to interrupt you, but that just came in now. I thought it would end.
I'm not surprised because this happens a lot. This is why, the idea that the Iran war is over, I don't know if it's over. We might be seeing a temporary ceasefire, but I don't know if it's completely over. I worry that after 2 weeks, if we don't get anywhere in the talks, that we might just go back to what we were doing before. Maybe not at the same level of intensity, but I worry that this will just become a return to the 12-day war, but elongated with an undisclosed time horizon, that the Israelis, the Iranians will just continue to take shots at each other. And Trump may well be like, okay, well, screw it. We did what we wanted to do. We'll just fund Israel with more, they get $4 billion of military funding from America. And they'll just continue to do this. It'll become like a proxy sort of war, right? The Chinese maybe support Iran with funding. The Russians provide intelligence and artillery. And this just becomes it becomes a new normal, right? Every day we'll wake up and be like, how are you doing? Yeah, the Israelis and Iran have struck another couple of sites across the Middle East. I worry about that. But I think for Lebanon, I don't think that the Americans wanted to involve the Israelis. I think Trump's had enough. I think he's had enough of being manipulated. Well, not that he's that intelligent to notice. I think he wanted to have a shift away from that. So I think that the Americans are going to push for these talks, but I worry that Trump's going to get bored and that we will circle back to this conversation in 2 weeks' time and be like, are we actually over?
Really?
Are we starting up again? No, I do worry about that. I'm not pretending to have any significant secret information, but that's just sort of where my mind is at.
There was no way, but there's no. Is it fair to say there's no way Trump will be dragged back into this?
No, but that's what I mean by if he were to be, he would only be dragged into it from a proxy perspective, like funding Israel.
No, I'm talking directly dragged into it.
I don't think so. Well, not for a while.
I agree.
I find it hard to believe, mate, that I can send it to you here. I find it hard to believe that the Americans would be wanting to get back into a war as at this scale and intensity. The Americans have burnt through a significant amount of their stockpiles. The Iranians are earning double in revenue what they were before the Strait of Hormuz was closed.
Killed it. They've killed it.
They're killing. They're bossing it. They're making good dollar. They have the sympathy of the international community, or more of the international community. A lot of countries don't like the Islamic Republic, or they don't like the IRGC. But again, from a optics perspective, if you're a third-party nation in Africa and you're watching what's going on, you just look at this as a new form of American bullying, of imperialism, of Western hypocrisy. A lot of things that a lot of the audience we talk to or listen to feel. So I think that this is not a win. There is no way I can frame it that Trump can somehow claim it. But I've already seen some MAGA zealots suggesting that this is a win because Trump has forced the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz. It's not open. There was a slight increase in some ships for a couple of hours, but it hasn't changed. So, and to change, let's talk about your other question about the future of the Middle East.
Yeah, so that's an important one. I'm most curious about that one.
Yeah, well, of course, I think we all are. Of course, also because you want to get back to your home, right? I want to move out there. So for me, I think Iran is going to become what I hesitated when I first started thinking about this war. I was like, oh, this is what I think, and then I was like, maybe I'll walk back some of my initial thoughts. But as the war's gone on, it's reinforced what I originally thought. Iran is going to become a more militarized, internalized police state. It's going to become more focused on its near abroad. It's going to be, because it has to rebuild, it has to repair what has happened. Now, this is all presuming that this conflict is largely over and we don't see a return because the negotiations don't fail. So we've got an Iran that is more focused on its internal matters, but it's also more willing to talk, perhaps, or have, I think it's called belligerent coexistence. There's a particular term for it, but it's a pretentious way of basically saying that the Saudis and the Iranians, they don't like each other, but they accept that the reality as it is, right? It's the same with Afghanistan. I use that as an example, right? But when the Taliban retook the country in 21, a lot of countries didn't want to have anything to do with them, right? Even the Russians and the Chinese were like, no, we're not going to talk to the Iranians, because no country wants to be the first to be normalizing ties with a group of people that was, outlawed 20 years ago. But in the past year and a bit, more countries have begun to host Taliban dignitaries. They've begun to talk with them more. And it's all because they're like, well, there's no alternative. Afghanistan has resources and trade opportunities. There's stuff there that we want or we can benefit from. So they're starting to talk. The Chinese hosted Taliban back in, I don't know, November or something. So the same will probably happen with Iran, that the regime, the government, whatever people call it, will be increasingly normalized in relations. People will accept that, and to be honest with you, there has been a growing observation among some people that sort of the Gulf states are more keen to sort of have decent relations with Iran. I'm not pretending
that's
that
a very no, but I
more
think
than
so.
Israel.
I think yes. We've been talking about this after the Qatari strike. There was momentum shifting in that direction as a deterrent to Israeli aggression, Israeli overreach.
Yeah.
I think that will happen. A lot of people are like, no, it's impossible. Iran struck all the Gulf countries. It's business as usual. They'll do what's right thing. A lot of countries have already forgiven their neighbors for atrocities. You know, obviously the best example is World War II. Now Europe has got the European Union. Would be unthinkable a few decades ago, but that's an extreme example. But I think relatively quickly, I think the Gulf countries will forget. They know there was restraint on Iran's side. You might disagree, but I think there was restraint. They were about to lift that restraint, but Iran could have done a lot more damage in these Gulf countries. There's some that probably shouldn't have been sort of struck. Did they cross some lines? Yes. But I also think the Gulf countries are pragmatic. The alternative to putting this behind us and improving relations. Go ahead.
No, I would say on that point very specifically, right? We've seen this growing. Well, actually, no, I'll take a further step back. So I mentioned that Saudi-Pakistani strategic partnership. Now, on the surface, it doesn't seem that important, right? The Saudis are not the most powerful military on the face of it. Pakistan is a military junta state with nuclear weapons, but it's mainly focused on India and central southern Asia than it is the Middle East as much. Its main concern is Balochistan in the southwest. And we saw exchanges between Iran and Pakistan late last year, I think it was, or mid last year. But the point being is you've been seeing a balance of power shift in the Middle East. On the one hand, you have the Saudis, Pakistan, on the other, Israel, Emirates, and then Turkey and Qatar. I can't remember which side they go. But these two balance of power shifts, right, is occurring, all with the idea of trying to counterbalance the other. Now, the 12-day war after Iran, and ever since October 7th, has, in the eyes of the West at least, or Israel, weakened Iran. Right, Iran was not as powerful. Its proxies had been exposed; they had been undermined. Nasrallah had been killed. Hezbollah had been set back. This sorts of stuff. But quite clearly, after this 6-week war, let's just call it that for now. This 6-week war, Iran has more potency than anyone ever thought, or arrogantly, underestimated. Now, I don't think we should deny that Iran has been hit badly. They have suffered a lot of damage, but we don't know the extent to how many stockpiles they had left, how many of their launchers were destroyed, because it's not just about the missiles or the projectiles, it's about the launchers and production facilities. And that was the goal so claimed by the Israelis and Americans. They were destroying their munitions factories, their production facilities, etc. Right? So let's assume that they've had significant damage, but they've still got a lot in reserve. They've still got, significant amount of their arsenal left. So they're still potent. So are they going to be the major player now? You could argue they can still be a competitor for the regional hegemon, but I think a lot of emphasis has been around Israel. I think a lot of the Gulf and neighboring states, Turkey included, have been increasingly opposed to Israel, or more specifically, the government, right? Because this is the ultra-nationalist government. Ben Gvir, Smotrich, these people are extreme individuals with extreme views of not just Palestine or West Bank, but what some people suggest is Greater Israel, right? This idea that Israel encompasses a huge sway of the Levant, Lebanon included, parts of Saudi Arabia, right? So I think that there is a feeling amongst certain Gulf states that that Israel is as much of a concern as sort of Iran is, for different reasons.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
And the last point I would just make is simply MBS is a very important character in all of this. He's much more pragmatic than his father, and his idea of, Vision 2030, is it, right? He's been trying to find a way to reposition Saudi Arabia in the Gulf, in the Middle East. because he knows he can't rely on petroleum, petrochemicals, the petrodollar forever. That's why he's exploring relationships with China. That's why he's exploring this, balance of power with Pakistan and so on. But also he's exploring improving, I'm going to use that word because I don't know if they'd ever normalize ties, but that he's looking at tacitly improving relations with Iran, because he's like, that's who's there. That's the reality. Let's just get on with it, right? We can't keep trying to force a government, right? What's it going to do? Blow up everything and make us poor and risk our vision of 2030 and infrastructure and stuff. So I think that you are seeing a paradigm shift, if you know what that means, right? Significant shift in the balance of power in the Middle East, right?
Oh, the
Americans are no longer there. I think it's going to be a lot more
paradigm. Some people are saying the paradigm goes much bigger than the Middle East. It goes through NATO, it goes through European-American relations, it goes through China, Russia, especially China. China there's a lot of reports that China played a key role in these negotiations. Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz is like saying the Gulf controlling the Strait of Hormuz. The Gulf controlling the Strait of Hormuz is almost like the US doing so. Or Israel controlling the Strait of Hormuz is almost like the US doing so. Obviously, Israel can't control the Strait. But Israel doing this means the US has that level of access. Israel is almost a proxy of the US.
I don't think Israel will control the Strait. I don't
no,
think
they won't. No, what I mean hypothetically is obviously Israel cannot control the Strait. It's completely out of the question. But I'm saying if Israel has control of anything, it indirectly means the US has control of that thing. Which in Iran's case, if Iran has control of something, in this case, the Strait of Hormuz, in a similar way how Israeli-American relations have become so close, China and Iran are becoming that close as well. And Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz might indirectly mean China controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Let's see for how long. That might only be a 3-month thing to get reparations. We don't know. Or it could be a long-term thing. Or it could be on paper just for 3 months. But in practice, though, all the countries in the region know that Iran has the capability to do whatever they want in the Strait of Hormuz, even though they might not control it legally. So long term, I think there's always going to be that mind in the back of the mind that we can't fuck with Iran too much. It could be something in 3, 4, 5 years' time that war will be fine. Exactly. That's the card. Iran just created a card. They created a card in any negotiation moving forward, especially with any country, whether it's China, the US, Israel, or the Gulf. And that's the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things to that. It's a fair set of points. I would just, for clarity, some people in watching might be like, what are these guys talking about? Like, it's all very abstract, it's all very arbitrary, right? We are talking about long time horizons here. We're talking about a long time. None of this is going to happen overnight, right? That we're talking about the shift in the balance of power, right? You don't just see America replaced by China overnight. It happens in phases, if it's happening at all. Some people don't think it is, or that it's reversing. So in the case of the Strait of Hormuz, if we specific, I can imagine a scenario where it's a multi-faceted agreement between, you're seeing this, right? We're seeing a return to regionalism, right? In the sense of the countries that are most focused, or the countries around that specific issue, deal with that specific issue, or the main actors around it. So in Europe, right, if Trump's going to leave NATO or threaten to defund NATO, I mean, a lot of people say it will collapse. Not necessarily. It might just actually reformulate NATO's focus to Europe, because without America involved as much, NATO will not be pulled into the Middle East. It won't be pulled into other parts of the world that NATO isn't focused on. And it will allow Europe to focus on its near abroad, right, on what they think is the threat of Russia, what they think of the issues in the Arctic and Southern Africa or Northern Africa and Southern Europe and migration, for example, right? Yeah. So in the Strait of Hormuz, who are the primary stakeholders going to be? The Gulf states, Iran, Oman. Israel, not so much. And, one thing you're talking about, Israel, they'll be powerful, yes, but you're on the presumption that the relationships with the United States stays good. We don't know what comes if in 28 AOC wins, right? If we get a really left-leaning president for whatever reason, right? We got Mandami in New York, right? If we get a new president, the younger generation in America are not pro-Israel. They're pretty anti-Israel or pretty anti-Zionism. So if we get a much more left-leaning American government, who's to say that Israel still gets its $4 billion funding? Then what happens to Israel's projection of power across the Middle East? It's going to be severely undermined. Not saying that it's suddenly not a player, it's a very capable military. And then one last point I would just say to your broader framing of China, NATO, and all that. Look, I've never been. I know your theory, and we've debated it, but I'm not convinced by this being some plan by Trump to sort of take on China, because he's had to be so involved in the Middle East that he's reallocated assets from China or the Asia theater to the Middle East, which you wouldn't want to do, and that's only involving.
I think it's because it's an operation that went wrong. I think his goal backfired in such a tremendous way. Yeah, I think like, if that turned out like Venezuela, then the argument would be like, hey, I just managed to get a big win strategically against China. The argument would make sense. But with where we stand right now, it did the complete opposite, pulling THAAD batteries out of South Korea, reducing arms sales to other countries in the region, pissing off your regional allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, because of the energy shortage. Yeah, it does the complete opposite of being able to strategically get an edge over China. And now Iran having control of the Strait of Hormuz does the complete opposite.
I think it will be a power sharing agreement. I do think that Iran will have, overall say, perhaps, but it will be split with Oman. And I think it will have the tacit backing or official backing of the Gulf states, because at the end of the day, they have to agree to it to get their shit out of there.
Do they?
To Asia, to China.
But do they have to agree, or they have no say in it? Like, what say does the Gulf countries have? Their biggest guarantor of security, the guarantor that gives them a say is the US, and the US just failed at being able to show that they can actually militarily support those countries to open the Strait of Hormuz if it ever needs to be, hurt Iran or destroy Iran militarily. They've lost that card. If the US lost that card, these Gulf countries lost their protection. Now, they'll do a deal with Iran. Iran is a pragmatic player. They do want peace. They will want deal with those countries. Even people that hate Iran, I hate the regime. But I also know that the regime has pragmatic leaders, even though ideological, businessmen as well. They do want the Strait of Hormuz open. They didn't want this war. The Strait of Hormuz wasn't closed before this war. The Strait of Hormuz never had a toll booth. No one talked about setting up a toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz. All this is now, I think this is all temporary, by the way. This is just for them to get reparations. And I think it will go back. Will even go back to normal, but maybe under certain economic terms that benefit Iran. Normal as in it'll be open again. There won't be a toll booth, but it will have a structure, some sort of fee structure that will benefit Iran. I don't know how it would look like. But there's so many factors. I don't know if that toll, I don't know.
There's not really any other financial structure. What other financial structure do you think could be there?
True. I can't think of any. Yeah.
No, I mean, are you in bed?
No, it's a sofa.
That's a pillow. That's a pillow. You're wearing a duvet. All right, it's a pillow.
No, it's a pillow. Yeah.
No, I mean, look, I think.
But that's been just right. This has been like a lot of people in the audience agree. I mean, it's been intense.
4 a.m. here. My girlfriend's going to be pissed. But what I would just summarize simply is, look, I think there's going to be a multilateral agreement between several countries over the strait. What I wonder is what the US is involved in that. I think China will have something to say about that. I do think there'll be some kind of payment structure. I don't think it's going to go back to normal. I just don't. I also want to just talk about the broader sort of balance of power here, right? This is when this war first kicked off, when the build up to it, I always thought there would be some kind of military action. I'm pretty good at predicting these things. I predicted the war in Ukraine, predicted Ethiopia, predicted a lot of stuff. And I thought there'd be military operations. Now, you could argue I got it wrong, but I got it wrong in the sense of just how much the scale. This is one of the biggest military operations we've seen in modern history in terms of, just the implications it's had for everything, the global economy especially. So to me, we are going to see a seismic shift in the balance of power, not just in the Middle East, but also, Trump's really put his foot in it now. And I think he's going to suffer significantly. And I think America's going to suffer significantly. Yeah. NATO, I mean, the implications there, I don't think are too much. I think Trump's just going to turn his attention to Greenland again, Cuba, blame the Europeans, try to distract from the Epstein files. And maybe in a few weeks' time, he'll return to being like, oh, those Iranians, and we'll see something else happen. I just find it difficult to see him categorically cutting this out. He needs to win favor, to your point from earlier. He needs to win favor for the midterms, doesn't he? So he might try to do something even more crazy, right? And I worry about Israel and Lebanon. I don't think they're done.
I think is to be honest, my take is different. I'll let you go to sleep. I know it's late for you. I'll give my take quickly to the audience. But Pyotr, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for jumping on at such a late hour.
No worries, mate. Have a good one. Cheers, Aaron.
Thank you, brother. So my take on Pyotr said he doesn't have, and sorry, I'm pretty exhausted. It's 5 a.m., 6 a.m. here. But my take on Lebanon, I think it's very good news for Hezbollah. Lebanon has the people that call the shots in Lebanon are either Iran, obviously the Lebanese, but to a lesser extent, Iran or Israel. And Israel lost a lot of leverage after this war. So I think after Iran won, so Israel lost a lot of leverage. After Iran was able to beat the world's biggest military in one of the biggest military operations we've seen in our generation, that changes the balance of power in a way that will give Hezbollah a lot more power again in Lebanon. Their power has been degrading for years, especially after October 7th, but even since before that explosion in Lebanon that happened before October 7th as well, that was pretty significant. So Hezbollah has been losing a lot of popularity to an extent where the government asked them to be disarmed. Now, there's two paths here. One is Hezbollah disarms and joins the government, highly unlikely. The other one is Hezbollah gets stronger. Iran has become stronger. Iran's going to make a lot of money from the Strait of Hormuz. They'll be able to rearm Hezbollah as well. They'll be able to do it through Syria. They've done it throughout this war somehow, even without Assad. They'll be able to rearm Hezbollah. Hezbollah will be a lot stronger. And I think Israel will put out of South Lebanon, and they'll have to live with that reality and eventually over time manage normalized relations with Lebanon, with Hezbollah. I think there could be a shift in mindset within Iran and all their proxies. And that shift will lead to no longer opposing Israel as they have over the last few years. The whole death to Israel narrative is going to slowly die down. So I think we will see a new Iran. It won't happen in an instant, but it will happen. I think Israel's people that have worries about Israel's expansion, the Greater Israel Project, I think that's going to take a massive hit because Gulf countries, in my opinion, will come together with Iran. Again, I'm basing this on the limited information we have, but they will, over the next 5 years, come together with Iran and improve relations with Iran. Why? Because they have to. Iran, I wouldn't say controls, because we don't know how it will look like in a few months and years' time. But Iran has the ability, and it's proven they have the ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. The Gulf countries have to play ball. In terms of outside the Middle East breaking, we won't include Lebanon. Fuck. All right, well, I have bad news. Fucking hell, I didn't expect this. Netanyahu just said, he literally said it, we won't include Lebanon. We will not include Lebanon in the 2-week ceasefire. All right, so this is the shit that pisses me off. You guys might have seen my tweet that went viral about how the statement by the defense minister when he said anyone in south of the Litani River cannot go back home. You guys have heard me do a lot of interviews on it. That kind of shook me. I've always been like 60% chance Israel does not want to annex Lebanese territory. They just want to get rid of Hezbollah. 40% they might want to annex Lebanese territory. But in this case, when I see comments like this by Netanyahu, it's first surprising because I thought Israel was in a very weak position. So if Netanyahu is in a weak position, he should abide to the ceasefire. And I'm under the impression that Trump is calling the shots. So Netanyahu should abide to the ceasefire. For him to go and make that statement right after Trump signed the ceasefire, that is a punch in the face to Trump. That is a stupid statement to make. That is a disgusting statement to make. Trump just did a deal with Iran. That deal included Lebanon and Hezbollah. And Netanyahu just spat on that deal and said they won't include Lebanon. Things like this is what pisses me off. So that changes the calculus. I'm surprised by this. Maybe it changes in the next few days. Will that drag Iran to, Iran is not in a place to mess around. Will it drag them into this war and start striking Israel? It could. It could. I don't know how wounded Iran is, but it could actually trigger the war again. It will continue. So that's a shitty statement by Netanyahu. But going back to the region, I think long-term after this peace deal, Gulf, Iran closer, Israel weaker, and a big shift that could happen, this is very speculative, could happen is Trump needs to recover politically, and there could be a massive repositioning of U.S.-Israeli relations. And I think Trump will slowly pull support away from Israel as a way to recoup some of the lost support from this war. I think it's inevitable anyway. If it's not under Trump, it's going to happen under a future leader. So I think the era of Israel having impunity in the region and unconditional support by the US, Iran might have been able to put an end to this through this war. And lastly, US-European relations will never look the same. US-Asian relations will never look the same. I said at the beginning of this war, if this war ends with Trump controlling the Strait of Hormuz, that could be one of the biggest wins strategically for the US long term, and a big win for Trump. And even though I'm obviously a pacifist, as I've said, I just don't like wars. I'm a believer in democracy, so I want democracies to be the most powerful countries in the world, to control AI, to control the new world order, whatever it is. I would like that to be the US or European country or my country of Australia or a group of them, because I'm a believer in democracies, not autocracies. So I said that if this war happens and Trump manages to gain control of the Strait of Hormuz without destroying Iran, without turning Iran into a failed state, he could call it a win. There's a statement here. He would call it a win. I'm so pissed at Israel. I'll tell you why in a second. But if the war loses, if China maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz, if this war ends in Iran control of the Strait of Hormuz, that will be a disastrous loss economically for the US. I don't think you guys understand how disastrous this will be. The Strait of Hormuz is so crucial to give the US leverage over China when it comes to Taiwan. Taiwan is screwed after this war. The US lost the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz. They pissed off their allies in the Gulf, in Europe and Asia. It made the US a lot weaker. Now things could change. Let's see how the deal looks like. But the US looks a lot weaker after this deal. And this is probably one of the best things that could happen to China. It was a gamble. The gamble did not pay off. Anyway, to kind of wrap it up with the last piece of news is, remember, Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, said, with the greatest humility, I am pleased to announce that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the US, along with their allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon. That was the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And now fucking Netanyahu says, the Israeli Prime Minister's office says the 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. I'm gonna fume at this in one of my tweets. But look, guys, I hope you appreciated the coverage. We're gonna continue the coverage. We'll see you again tomorrow. And I hope you appreciate that I keep trying to bring voices from all sides, so you understand what the other side is thinking, people you might disagree with. And I'll try to do this as much as I can, because I'm always curious to understand both sides. Really appreciate it, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and congratulations on the good news. Bye-bye.